Hello, Robs. We're back with Triad, a novel of the supernatural by Mary Leader, a book which I thought I was going to finish earlier today, but while contemplating finishing it, I was eating some crackers because I felt nauseous. And the next thing I know, I was at the ER with a rapid heartbeat. Apparently, I have a low potassium level, so that could be explain exactly why I was feeling fatigued and sick lately. Anyway, let's try to finish this before I pass away. It's not a very fun feeling when your heart starts racing for no reason. Although there was a reason because I had low potassium. Chapter 21. There were some rather nice looking, I don't know if they were nurses' aides or what they were, but they were rather nice. And one even had a British accent, which I thought I was just mishearing. Anyways, let's go. Let's go, bruv. Chapter 21. Frightening as the first part of the dream had been, the end had brought such a sense of peace and triumph that, after nursing the baby, I drifted off again and slept soundly for the last few hours of the night. In the morning, I tackled the dirty clothes Miss Lemke had been unable to finish the day before. As I started to load the washer, I noticed that the lid of the cistern was slightly ajar. Although the water was not exposed and a hammer was lying beside it, Alan must have been working on the pump again. He'd said something about not liking the way it sounded. Surprised at his carelessness, I pushed the cover into place. It was warped and had to be fastened, or the slightest pressure might knock it off. As I picked up the hammer, I ran my free hand over the wood, smooth and cold and slippery. Suddenly, I felt a little sick. Oh no. What had I let Alan enamel it with? What? Enamel it white? Why had I let Alan enamel it white? White will make it show up better so that no one will trip over it, he said. Of course, perfectly good reasoning. I was being silly. I drove the nails down firmly. Over at the sink, I started to turn the faucet, then hesitated. Maybe Alan hadn't finished fixing the pump. Perhaps that was why the cover was off. I'd better switch to the other cistern just in case. Something was moving at the other end of the basement. No, I began to laugh shakily. It was only my reflection in the old mirror that was still propped against the masonry. A web of cracks had opened up in the brittle glass, fragmenting my image into a badly assembled jigsaw puzzle. As I moved, the multifaceted reflection followed, distorting itself into a series of cubistic impressions. Nude descending a staircase, I quoted under my breath. Only I wasn't nude, and the sensation was unpleasant, not amusing. I took a sheet from the wash and draped it over the heavy wooden frame, then went over and turned the valve to the cistern. After the clothes were done and David fed and napping, I drew a bath for myself. Zero weather had set in, and there's nothing more luxurious when the world outside is locked in rigor mortis than to be able to turn off the weather and take a long, hot soak in the tub. I basked in my warm, watery cocoon. Slowly I lathered my limbs one by one, then slid them lazily back into the water, letting the soap bubbles rise to the surface to mingle with the bubble bath. I gingerly scrubbed my right foot, feeling rivulets of tickles running up my leg as I drew my washcloth over the sole. When I was finished, I repeated the process with the left foot. As I scoured my heel, I noticed a crescent of faint white dishes on the skin as I pulled it taut. Dashes, not dishes. Been odd for a bunch of dishes to be on her skin as she pulled it taut. These scars had been there as long as I could remember, but I'd never thought much about them. There was a similar crescent on the other side of the heel, the marks well spaced out, so I bit her foot all bloody. The words reverberated in my mind as I sat there almost paralyzed with realization. That was it. I didn't bite anyone. I was bitten. These were tooth marks on my heel that were once close together, but spread apart as I grew. That was why they no longer resembled a bite, and that was why I never paid any attention to them. It was she who talked in the doctor's office. It was Rhiannon's memory he recorded, not mine. The bubbles were going flat and the water beginning to chill, or was it just me? But the tub was a sanctuary I was loath to leave. So she was there after all. Oh my God. David, what should I do? Call Dr. Ambrose? I must call Dr. Ambrose immediately. But he wasn't there. The secretary said he hadn't come to the office that morning, and that no one answered at his home. Isn't that unusual? I asked. No, she replied. Dr. Blais is here. He could see you tomorrow morning. Couldn't he see me this afternoon? I felt the walls closing in on me. I'm sorry, in her best sweetness and Freud manner, but he's all booked up, with Dr. Ambrose not being here, you know. He just returned yesterday morning and spent the day going over cases with Dr. Ambrose. Well, could he come out here after hours? It's terribly important. She was apologetic but firm. Dr. Blais doesn't make house calls. Besides, he has a meeting tonight. I'll put you down for 10 tomorrow morning. I let the phone fall into its cradle. How could Dr. Ambrose do this to me? To go off without seeing me at least one last time. But of course he hadn't dared see me, or Phoebe. I began to recover my composure, and with that came rational explanation. Why didn't I think of it before? It was my memory that Dr. Ambrose had tapped, not Rhiannon's. Naturally, I'd had recollection of an experience as traumatic as that one somewhere in my subconscious because I was the baby that had been bitten. Being a natural mimic, I'd reproduced Rhiannon's words as my own mind recalled them. A long-distance call from Alan steadied me. He'd finished in Albuquerque and would arrive home sometime after midnight. Surely a few more hours. Besides, it was all a lot of nothing. Anyway, Dr. Ambrose would never have left if he hadn't thought I could manage on my own. After supper, I tucked David into his crib upstairs, his tiny hands curled like pink seashells, and then I took a book from the library and stationed myself on the living room couch to wait up for Alan. I was glad I hadn't been able to get Dr. Blais to come out. It would have been a poor sort of introduction. What would he have thought of me? Besides, Dr. Ambrose would probably be back by the end of the week. He didn't expect me until Friday anyway. I started to read, but the letters blurred before my eyes. Shaking my head, I fought against the drowsiness that assailed me, but it gradually crawled up over my limbs and crouched on my chest. As the book slipped from my hand, I was standing in the snows on the top of a mountain, my arms outstretched to the light, but the earth's talons clung to my feet, and I was forced to look back, down the spiral of years to the ultimate depth, where a mare-headed goddess, with the blood of sacrifice on her lips, lifted her head and whinnied her exultation. I was crouched in the shadows with a golden halter in one hand and a spear in the other, while my shield lay on the floor, catching the blood of a dying boy. Timmy, incense rose from the altar, and now it was David being lifted into Timmy's place. I snatched up the shield and held it over the child, thrusting the spear into Rhiannon's breast as I did so. But it split and broke off harmlessly, although she did lose her grip on the infant, and another was lifted into his place, and another. All humanity was passing over the altar. I lunged again and again, but she only laughed and at last closed in on me. Turn after turn, up the spiral, we met and parted, then met again. Always contending, grip against grip, a kitten dead, and a baby, an old man sealed in a cave, and a hawk spiraling its way into the heavens, she drawing a veil between us, I ripping it away. Suddenly the mountain moved and got clumsily to its feet, spinning me off its back into a fragment of cloud from which I watched a long line of blindfolded people filing past the behemoth. It extended its trunk to them, and one by one they groped along it and then went away, nodding their heads knowingly. Some I recognized. Alan was there, and Dr. Ambrose, and Marion Dahlman, and Dr. Gordon, until at last, from my vantage point, I saw myself walking up to the beast, my eyes bandaged like the rest, but apart from them and trying to make some sense out of the tail, which none of the others had touched, until the elephant turned and wasn't an elephant. It was a mare with blood on its mouth. A frenzied barking aroused me. Bared teeth were slashing close to my face and tugging and ripping something in my hand. I wasn't on the Davenport. I was standing by the crib, with the moonlight streaming in the windows, scattering the crystal bones of trees on the nursery floor. A high wind had risen outside, opening breaches in the clouds and spattering brittle needles of ice on the roof and gutters. As I looked uncomprehendingly at the gashed pillow in my hands, the barking subsided into a whimper, and I heard a tail thumping in the dark. Nothing else. David, she done to him? But then a thin wail of hunger issued from the crib. Branwyn, what are you doing? The light flashed on, and Alan, still in his overcoat, stood in the doorway, horror and a terrible comprehension in his eyes. He was wrong, of course, as was Dr. Ambrose, and now Dr. Blaius and all the others. Only Lance understood. Only Lance and I could hear the metallic laughter of Rhiannon echoing in the speaking tubes. And that's the end of chapter 21, and I will finish this tonight, unless I perish beforehand. All right, goodbye, bruv.